Flavia, fantastic panel. Thank you very much for moderating that. And thank you all panelists as well. I'll just remove my glasses. Thanks all, by the way, for being here. This has been an absolutely compelling virtual Nano conference. Please stick around. We've got a lot more to come, such as our next speaker, who is the former CIA Chief Polygraph Examiner and Interrogator, Dr. Barry L. McManus. Before I introduce Dr. McManus, I want to tell you about the moderator of the panel after Dr. McManus speaks. Moderating the panel, we'll have a member of the board at SIT, Christian Whip. Very quickly, before I introduce Dr. McManus, please hit that Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. That's the way you can ask questions to us. We'll have a panel after the next, a Q&A panel after we finish the next panel, whereby we'll be asking all your questions on this big day today, this big launch of this MSc in computer science and software engineering at SIT. So please do continue to fire questions. You've thrown lots of questions at us already, which we're answering, but we will answer them in person at the end. So do stick around for that. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Dr. McManus, who's going to be sharing his world-class expertise on finding criminals and detecting lies in his keynote session today, entitled Extended Version of Cyber Security Concepts. And Dr. McManus has been up, I think, since 2 or 3 a.m. So I bow down to you, Dr. McManus. As a journalist, I know what it's like to get up at 2 a.m. for 5 years. I'll hand it over to you.
Okay, good morning, everyone, and thank you very much, Mark, for this introduction, and it's a pleasure to be here. My theme or my agenda this morning for the next 15 minutes or so is to have a conversation about human aspects in cybersecurity. And it seems like, unfortunately, you know, in my field, it's always bad news, and it always comes at the end. The importance, in my opinion, of having a cyber workforce that is not only technically strong and understanding computer science and software engineering, but also understand the importance of human behavior, of people behind the science. And first, to be clear, unlike other distinguished guests here this morning that I've listened to since 2 a.m. my time in the US, this morning, is not that first, that I'm not a scientist or a full-time researcher. I am a practitioner, and to become more specific, a human collector, a person who works with people to collect information. And how do we prepare and protect ourselves offensively and defensively against hackers, or what I call bad actors? And I also call it the forgotten conversation, because this is generally the last thing that most people want to talk about. I unfortunately will bring bad news, because my job has been in the past is finding those bad people. But I also think it's significant for those who are in the field of cyber, whether it is as an engineer or computer scientist, to understand the human aspects of it. But what I would like to do first is to make clear of what I refer to as a hacker, and also what I refer to as a cracker. For the audience, so in my opinion, a hacker is a person who is interested in working on or operating systems in depth. And generally, hackers are programmers. They have good and advanced knowledge on the operating systems, programming languages, and networking concepts. They are capable of identifying the risk of the system, and a hacker tries to gain further knowledge in discovering technological areas. The cracker, on the other hand, is what I call that bad actor. That bad actor in which a hacker becomes is someone or a person who violates those basic principles, the system's integrity and remote machinery with malicious intent. He or she gets unauthorized access to a system and resources and data. Crackers also destroy vital information of the organization. He or she denies legitimate users service and causes problems for the targets. This area can result in software and hardware network issues. So now that we get that understanding, what do we do? How do we prepare and protect ourselves offensively and defensively against these hackers or bad actors. Next slide, please. I'd like to talk a little bit about identifying some of the profiles of these bad actors. And these are going to be in generalities that I will speak of. A psychological profile is what I'm going to address, and I'll try to give maybe one or two examples of what I mean about this. And also for the audience, realize I'm talking about those bad actors, those crackers, doing things intentionally to destroy a system or a program. First, hackers basically can fall into a couple of broad categories, and that's what I'm going to speak of, broad categories, the good and the bad. The topic of hackers is very broad. I will focus and highlight what we know and some of the gaps. I will provide an overview of their psychological and personality profiles, keeping in mind that no one size fits all, and people are individuals and are different. Meaning that stereotypes do exist, and we need to be aware of what those stereotypes are to avoid missing an opportunity to identify those seeking to cause us harm. For example, a stereotype may be that hackers being all males and are only coming from a certain area or a certain region or a certain country, with the majority maybe males, but females are also bad actors. They're also hackers and may reside anywhere in the world and be of any age. So what and who are these individuals? And I sort of gave an overview, and it'll be a very quick profile of what some of these bad actors could look like. And I speak of the idea of obviously very bright, of high intelligence, methodical in their actions, although they can not necessarily care about things in such that they're oblivious to things that may not be of interest to them. They're curious and independent. Arrogance also plays a role, the desire to show off one's computer skills. I'd like to give you a real world life idea. Someone that wasn't a hacker or a cracker, but someone that was also of high intelligence, very methodical, very curious, and very independent. And this was a nuclear scientist, also a very scientific person. And having all of these major attributes, there was something else that he had very strong. It was very able to overcome being caught in his bad actions. The thing that this individual did, and what we are trying to do, and what I want you to understand as engineers and programmers, is that understanding people's behaviors will sometimes defeat their actions. And what I mean by that, this individual was able to not only defeat the system around him, but he was able to do this because he understood the culture of the people that he was trying to circumvent, trying to get around. He understood their traditions, he understood their values, he understood their mores, he understood particular things about them, and his ability to communicate that and get people to buy into him was his success. So the important things here is for, once we get over what we're trying to build, is also that people will try to destroy those things. They will try to capture the things. They will try to penetrate these things. And these are things that you must understand as someone in this field to be able to let's say, identify. Next slide, please. In addition, some of the basic psychological profiles of bad actors, again, people who do target you and your company or your agency or your government, is that a lot of these hackers or crackers really start at a very early age. Some say as early as the age of 12. My experience has been more around the ages of 17, where they become very curious and start browsing into chat rooms and see how things work. A lot of times they're socially different. They're loners, they're by themselves, which is not unusual. They may not be socially popular. One of the things that in studies that I have been a participant in is that some of them often have not a lot of they're sexually inexperienced related to their peers. So they're sort of isolated. So personality-wise, psychologically-wise, how can they be accepted into what they consider their normal society? Next slide, please. Hackers, crackers, spies, and thieves. I call these industrial spies and thieves that may use some of the same techniques and tools to explore or to crack into a system. Their motivations may be somewhat of the same, which is, again, something else that one must think about, is what motivates someone to do this. I think this has become very important as far as understanding human dynamics. Sometimes the motivations are somewhat similar to any other hacker or cracker, that is doing something to gain an advantage, sometimes for revenge, where they steal or try to steal something of confidential information. They also may feel unvalued, not a valuable person within the company, within the organization they work, and even sometimes socially, they feel isolated. They feel a sense of not being valued. So they act out. And they act out in a way sometimes by having access or penetrating an organization, looking for weaknesses, flaws, and vulnerabilities. And I'm not talking about the software. I'm not talking about breaking into a system. I'm talking about the individual. I'm talking about the person. I'm talking about seeking that individual they feel that has a flaw, that has a vulnerability, that has a weakness, that in turn that they can use to their benefit. Next slide, please. I'd like to address types of hackers or bad actors. And there are many more than the 4 that I have here, but these are 4 that I thought would sort of resonate with the audience and to understand exactly what we're trying to capture here. And in these 4 categories, I'll try to get a little more in depth, a little bit about what this means. Types of crackers or hackers or bad actors that I call them is always the criminal type. And this is someone that you may think, well, why would someone do this? What would be the advantage of me being a bad actor or a cracker to invade or penetrate someone's system? You may say, well, criminal normally is for financial gain. But you also have those criminal psychopaths, those individuals that, I don't know, they take pleasure in creating havoc. And they are sensation seekers. They're opportunists. There's a book that is very famous. It's quite old. It goes back to, I think, 2006 by an author named Robert Hare. It's called Snakes in Suits. And the whole concept of this book was to look at psychopaths who invade Wall Street. Those individuals that come from some of the best schools, they're some of the brightest, they're highly intellectual, all of those things that I mentioned in a couple of slides ago. However, they have an evil side. That evil side is to penetrate an organization, to create havoc, sometimes for personal financial gain, and sometimes just because of the psychopathic mindset. Your job, or our job, even what system it is how do we identify those people before they invade our system? So think of someone like that. The other is the ideological. The ideological person is that individual who shuns, I don't know, the sort of restrictions and believes that all information, whether it's the technical tools or technology, should be shared with everyone. And I think we've seen that in the past with some pronounced individuals out there. I won't give out names. I'm not a name dropper, but just think back of some of the most recent cases of individuals that are more ideological. They're doing it, they're invading or penetrating a system because they think there's wrongdoing, and everybody should have that. The third category I mentioned here is the government sponsored. Sometimes the government gives them or empowers that individual. Sometimes that individual obviously is working within a sophisticated system. They're backed by the government, even in organizations, sometimes organized crime. And sometimes it's direct, sometimes it's indirect. The idea is that, again, they look for the weaknesses and the flaws and the vulnerabilities. And they do, in essence, have that sort of enhanced social skills, that ability to manipulate others. So again, a third category of person that one should be aware of. And the last is the revengeful. And I look at them as the insider threat. And a lot of times we tend to forget about that. We forget about the people that we sit next to. We forget about the fact that we're sort of all in this together, but yet there may be that odd out, that individual who may not necessarily feel that he's being or she's being valued. That's the insider threat. That insider threat, that person can feel pissed off, he could feel or she could feel mistreated, he or she could feel misunderstood, disgruntled, and angry, whether it's their company, whether it's their government, and they strike out. And the idea is, how do we identify these four types of crackers or bad actors that invade our workplace? Next slide, please. To look at motivations, and again, I think is just as important as some of the profiles that we look at. With motivations helps us to identify some of those categories, or some of those individuals in those categories. And the idea that, generally speaking, I speak of the love of the challenge is sometimes intoxicating, and doing what others can't do, and the challenge of the event, the respect you get from others within the community, and specifically within this hacker community, because that within itself is a community that thrives on each other. It's like being someone who joins an organization, who joins a group, who wants to belong, and that's a very powerful thing. People are motivated by many different things, but to be an affiliate sometimes entices someone to join an organization that may not be in his or her best interest, and again, to hack or to penetrate a system. Next slide, please. The intellectual, again, I speak of intellectual challenge. I talk about the ethos of the hacker community, that there should be a level of playing field in society. That person, again, feels that there should be no restrictions, and the world should have access to information in a highly conspiratorial society. Next slide, please. So, I'm sure everyone in the audience is probably thinking this. At this point, everyone is thinking, why is it important for me to understand this? Now, all the other things that you've heard this morning is clearly in relationship to what you are hoping to do in any program. You go to SIT, you want to get a master's degree in behavioral computers or as engineering, and you're thinking, this guy is talking about hacking into a system. Why is this important to me? And for those who are interested in cybersecurity and thinking about, well, defeating those individuals from penetrating your system, the more you know and understand the threats, the better chances you'll have to manage and defeat it. That's number one. Two, it's critical to arm cyber professionals, and that are those that are in the audience, but I say in general. The more you know, the more powerful you become, especially with the human tools, knowledge to devise new security strategies. It's one thing to be technically attuned, and there's another thing to be able to communicate what you know and be able to work within different environments with different people. You have to understand the human dynamics. Anything that's made by man, any machine, there is the person behind it. My job, or what I'm trying to share, is getting to know the person behind it. Now, what does that require from you? It requires, obviously, training. It requires your awareness, and it requires practice. Communication is something that we must practice. In today's technology, we sort of get away from that human interactions. Instead of going or calling someone on the phone, we text them. The other thing I want to say that's also very unique about the bad actor, the hacker, the cracker, if I show you this instrument here is a phone, and I would ask you in the audience, the normal person would say, yeah, this is very simple, it's a telephone. What do you do with it? You make calls. You give this to someone that's a hacker or cracker, it's not about the fact that it's a telephone and the fact that you make calls on it. That inquisitiveness of that person is, what if I take this thing apart and determine and see that there's things here that, what else can I do with it? What else can make this different? The hacker is curious, and that curiosity obviously carries over into things. Unfortunately, sometimes we have troubles or have problems. The more we understand, the better chance to manage. Critical arms to the cyber professional with human tools and knowledge to devise new security strategies. Requires training, awareness, and practice, and yet requires global partnership among cyber professionals to develop an understanding of the threats and how to manage and defeat it. Next slide, please. and I'll try to move through these as quickly as I can. As cyber attacks, and again, I want to say one thing before I move into my closing, is my recommendation, or what I want for cyber workforce to be taught or develop a keen understanding of the psychological mindset and personality and behavioral attributes of a hacker and cracker. Second, once the cyber workforce understands and learns the various preferred self-image and persona that the hacker and or cracker strives to present to the workforce and public, this will provide clues for you to sort of find the thematic representation the hacker and cracker would find most offensive and or psychologically disruptive. These images help prepare you and provide the workforce the necessary clues to learn and combat the threat. In closing, as the cyber attacks and become more sophisticated and are growing exponentially, the cyber workforce is striving to strengthen and sustain the talents needed to protect, detect, defend, respond to these attacks, and they need to continue to develop their skill sets. And as I said, this unfortunately is a topic that is always last. It's a topic that are not giving a lot of thought to, but it's something that could change your organization and either make it move forward or destroy it completely. I thank you very much. I've run out of time, and I'll turn it back to the moderator. Thank you.
Thank you, Barry. That was extremely interesting, seeing hacking from a completely different perspective. Let me just introduce the other members of the panel. We have Candid and Vasily. Candid is a cyber protection specialist who has been working with very many cyber protection companies during his career, and he is at the other end of the hacker war. Then we have the view from a student of computer science, our own student Vasily Zorin, who is now studying a Master's of Science in Singapore at our partner university, the National University of Singapore. So, guys, I'd like to get into the talk. Barry, seeing that you're used to all-night interrogations, what, at the end of the day, would you recommend people who are going into cybersecurity or to protect against cybercrime? What should they be learning in addition to their skills in technology?
Well, I do, Christian, think that the current weakness that I see in the lack of awareness of again, cyber career opportunities and training standards is truly understanding the significance and importance of human dynamics, human behavior. And I think that's one thing that's missed. And you know, I see it all the time. We put a great deal of effort in, as we should, in the actual tools that we're learning, but I think we're losing so much of the human aspect of how people behave. And I think that works not only in just the science of it, I think that also works as a business person. How do you translate that into meeting people and to business? And
so,
the more
you're basically saying, Barry, you need to understand your enemy.
Well, absolutely.
Doing it. Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Candid, can I switch to you? You know, as the expert in cybersecurity, I mean, what types of cybercrime do you see? What types of malware? And you know, and what's the trend in this area?
Yeah, I mean, the type of attack, of course, depends on the motivation of the attacker, like Barry said, right? So cyber criminals who are after monetary gains, they probably will use malware, as in computer viruses, to steal your credit card or maybe encrypt your data and then held it hostage. And on average, we actually see around 300,000 new computer viruses every day. Wow. And yes, of course, not all of them are completely different in function. So it's more like a variation. Maybe you can think of it as a birthday present, right? It has a different wrapper around it. So the color is different. You can shake it, but inside it's still the same toy with the same functionality. And usually that toy, or in that case, computer virus, is distributed through emails. So about 1 in 200 emails is actually malicious. And that means there's tens of millions of malicious emails being sent around every day. And we all know it takes only one user to open the attachment, to click it, to then get compromised and infect themselves. So that's kind of the simple way for cyber criminals. But there are, of course, also sophisticated attacks. So more the nation state actors, like Barry said, they're more into espionage and sabotage attacks. They might actually use the same techniques to compromise machines, because just think about it, right? Why would they use something very complicated if just guessing the password of a sysadmin is already good enough and successful? I mean, why waste the effort? But yes, for more difficult targets, they can use additional things like vulnerabilities. So flaws in software code, which they can misuse to then execute their own code. Okay. And probably one of the most famous example was Stuxnet, which my team helped discover back in 2010. So Stuxnet was one of the first global cyber attack, which actually had a real impact on the physical world, because the aim was to attack and disrupt the uranium enrichment facility in Iran. So it's a clear kind of cyber warfare or cyber attack, which brings up on so many levels. They used a lot of different vulnerabilities to go into the networks and then attack the industrial control system. But they also used USB sticks to hop from one machine to another, because of course some of those systems are just protected. So quite complex and sophisticated.
Okay, so these complex attacks, do they always come, you know, through the web, or do they also utilize the human users of those networks?
A lot of those attacks, of course, make use of so-called social engineering. So they misuse the human aspect, because if you put some urgency, the weakest link often is the human, right? They will open the attachment, or they will pick up the USB stick from the parking garage and plug it in because they're curious, they want to help. So that can actually be used to then kind of jump into it. So that works for simple attacks like phishing, which might only take about 10 minutes to set up, compared to the sophisticated attacks like Stuxnet, which probably took about 10 people for 6 months and $1 million as a budget. And even then, they still made some mistakes. So there's various levels.
Okay, so understanding how the hacker psychologically thinks and how he manipulates you as the user for his needs is also a crucial element of cybersecurity. That's
absolutely, because in the end, the attackers are very creative in finding new ways in bypassing existing securities. So you have to think like a hacker in order to actually prevent them.
Very cool. So Vasily, you as a student of computer science and also with a focus on cybersecurity, are you being taught any of these elements?
Basically, I would say that we have been told two aspects. First is technical, which includes like standard elements like confidentiality, integrity, availability principles, and like the most popular attacks and how to prevent them. We also touched such topics as application of AI technologies and how they can be used to detect some malware activities or prevent cyber crimes. And also we studied two very interesting concepts of decentralized applications and decentralized autonomous organizations. These two concepts are based fully on blockchain technology, and actually they have such a built-in security, so they are more stable to the attacks. From the people side, first of all, we studied how to incorporate such information security policies into the behavior of people, because it's not about just writing information security policies, but the question is how to change people's behavior, how to change the pattern so that this can become like a personal hygiene, not to open strange links, or how to check that this email could be a phishing email or something. And another important aspect is about how we can ensure that we don't have like bad person in software development teams, and how to integrate some checks into our software development process, like random code review or external audit, to ensure that the product that we develop is secure enough and don't have any backdoors.
Super. That sounds like a pretty extensive study that you have. So Candid, from your point of view as an employer of people, what would you like to have them to be taught before they come and work for you?
I think it's important that the students understand that they have to look at security as a whole. And that means, of course, as Vasily said, security has to be a crucial part from the beginning in the development process when building something, and not just kind of sprinkled on top of it at the end, right? It has to be at the beginning, because otherwise it will usually fail. And it also has to be kind of multidisciplinary. So it's very complex systems nowadays, right? So it's not just the software, there's also the physical security aspect, and of course the human aspect, as Barry said. And all of it has to be integrated and taught so that the overall system will be secure.
And now with the, we've heard about this from leading experts in quantum physics, building quantum computers. We had a speaker who invented quantum cryptography at one of our last Insights events. I mean, with the onset of quantum cryptography, I mean, that's supposed to be unhackable, right? So will everybody be out of business?
Well, I guess the short answer is unfortunately no. History has shown us that even strong cryptography will usually be poorly implemented. So there might be some weaknesses that can be misused by the attacker. But let's, for the sake of argument, assume it's unbreakable, it's well implemented. Well, it's still just one part of a whole complex system, right? So the attackers will just wait till you actually need to perform some work on the data, which means you need to decrypt it or work in some other way on it. And they will then just shift to the weakest link and attack it there. And we all know the weakest link very often is the human. So unfortunately, we won't be out of jobs. So it's still a good time to study computer science.
Okay, cool. And Barry, I mean, is it possible to track people that are, doing cyber crime based on profiling like you would do with other criminals?
Yeah, yes. I mean, it has been done. I mean, once you've identified, and I think each student has to learn, my belief in the studies at SIT is case studies of individuals who actually have done it, and to follow certain behaviors, and it will lead you to the physical piece of it. And let me just say this one thing, is that is there a crackable or uncrackable system? As long as there's a human element behind it, in my opinion, it's crackable. Because I'm not going to go after the system, I'm going to go after the person behind the system. I want access to what you have, Christian. So I'm not worried about the software that you have. I am going to in some way befriend you. I'm going to find out what your weakness, what your flaw, what your vulnerabilities are, and what you need in your life. And if I can do that and persuade you to maybe take a flash drive that I have and insert it into your system or whatever to get what I need, or to penetrate that hardware, is what I do. So again, to sort of answer, in my opinion, as a behavioralist, I'm going to go after the person, if that makes sense.
Cool, that does totally make sense. Well, thank you, gentlemen. This was, for me, a very interesting panel to moderate, because we did look at aspects which are not so usual in the context of this subject. And thank you very much for your participation, and handing back to Mark.